very warm welcome to my community. It's your weekly program that allows Barbadians to share their rich history and heritage and so enrich the lives of all of us. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. This week, our guest is a gentleman who has always enjoyed a strong connection with this community. From a young age, he was actively involved in various activities and events here. Today, he has fond memories of the people and this space, which is almost sacred to him, for it shaped his upbringing. He credits this community for providing him with the support and guidance so necessary to navigate life. Interestingly enough, if you are a student of history and you're thinking of a topic for your research paper, you might wish to consider this community. Hal Gollop is presenting what could be regarded as a full thesis on this community, Britain. As expected, he begins by placing this community in perspective. It's over to you, Mr. Gollop.
I should give you a little historical, fill you in with a little historical data. You will see that it runs along Highway 5. And it is a freehold village. From that point of view, it is important to note that the land which forms the acreage of the village is owned by the freeholders. They're not tenantry holdings. They're land owned by the villagers, and it runs along Highway 5, where there is Edgecombe on the western extremity of the village, and Carrington on the eastern extremity. We can date the origin somewhere back to about 1846, 47, where the village came out of lands owned by White River Plantation. And White River Plantation comprised about 73 acres in those days. And it was cut up, subdivided sometime in the 1840s, and that subdivision gave rise to a proprietorship by a Mr. John Chase Eversley. He was the proprietor of Bentley's, and he acquired the portion which was named Burton's. And that portion consists of about 32.5 acres. Now, Eversley later on sold off the 32.5 into two lots, two 16-acre lots. And those lots were bought by a Mr. William Daniel and a Mr. Samuel Daniel. Now, significantly, those names are still very much part of the Brayton population. There's one big Daniel family that is still there. Most of the members have moved out of the village, but their descendants who are still there. A name that would be, or should be known to many Barbadians, because he's still very much alive, Mr. Norman Daniel, who was a former principal of the St. Leonard's Boys' School, may very well be descendants of those Daniels, but the name Daniel had an original place in the origin of the village, as it were, back sometime in the 1840s. And those Daniels subdivided the lots over time, and we had up to about 1870, about 1885 or so, the village consisted of about 700 inhabitants, which is fairly sizable for a small village. And that size of that population, that development had taken place up to about 1885. Now, the name itself, Burton, as I have checked, derives from a Mr. Richard Cholmondeley Burton. Richard Cholmondeley Burton. He was the owner of Rose Hill Plantation. I believe that's Rose Hill, St. Peter. And he owned that plantation, but he held a mortgage over this White River, from which Burton sprang. And the name Burton then took its origin from this Richard Cholmondeley Burton, who was an original owner of that Rose Hill plantation, but who had mortgaged the White River plantation, out of which the Burton lot originated. So we have the village, 32.5 acres. As I said, it is bounded on this side here by Carrington's plantation, Carrington factory. And on the western extremity, there's Edgecombe as well, Edgecombe plantation, which was also a sugar factory. In the days when sugar was king, this village had a sugar factory on either extremity, eastern and western. On this left side of the Highway 5 going towards Bridgetown, there's Bentley. And on the other side, separated by Highway 5, is Edgecombe. And those two plantations were, the proprietors were Mr. Arthur Skeet in the early days, Mr. Arthur Skeet at Bentley, and his brother, Mr. Bruce Skeet at Edgecombe. And the village developed along those lines, as I said, strictly agriculture and heavily cultivated agricultural lands, cane being the main crop. And that really had a significant development in the village. So you could see that the village itself is linked to the agricultural development of the country, especially sugar. As we sit here, for example, and we were to look south, I can point out several plantations within a mile radius. We have right here Bentley. We are on lands formerly owned by Bentley Plantation. Then there is just a short half mile, less than half mile as the crow flies, Lower Grays. And then we move further south there, and we have Hannah's, just a stone's throw away. And there's Yorkshire just across here, less than a mile in a straight line. And you move right around, and you would come to Woodbourne, another plantation, then Carrington, and going further east, we go back to Hampton. These are all within a striking distance. And moving further east, northeast, we would go to plantations like Chapel and Halton and Bide Mill and French's. All of those plantations within about a mile radius. Now, the modern village has seen contiguous settlements growing up on this side of the village, which is not originally part of the 32.5 acres Burton settlement. These were lands that were bought over by tenants of Bentley, and they have now created another settlement, separate and distinct from the original Brereton settlement. But generally speaking, nowadays, everybody refers to it as Brereton, as including this portion, which was originally part of the Bentley plantation, but now owned by tenants under the Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act, that scheme. And if we went to further east, the eastern extremity of the village, there would be a tenantry belonging to Carrington, which now has a number of landowners who benefited from the same Tenantry Freehold Purchase Act. But there you have it. Maybe we could take a look at a walk or ride or drive later on, and you could see the village from this extremity at the west to the one at the east, where the original Brereton divide may be marked off. From the family right here, one of the important families in the development of the village, the Lanes, and you go right up to the eastern extremity where there's the Baptist Hall, Baptist Church. And you come across a number of names that have been very important in the development of the village. I mentioned the Lanes there. There are the Critchlows. There are the Sargents, Blackmans. These are all very popular names. Hunts, Franklins, Prescotts, Gollops, Blackmans, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest families in the village. And these have all featured very, very prominently. But it is a very closely knit village, very, very closely knit. And that has been really responsible for the development of the parish, of the village. But as I said, mainly agricultural. The village has, the families have produced a number of persons who have gone on and done very well. Of course, the educational system has been largely responsible for that, even from the point of view that even though it was a village with that kind of background, strictly agrarian, the educational system has been able to provide the wherewithal where social mobility has been a feature of the development of the people who live here. There was no school in the immediate area, but the villagers went across to Ebenezer, which is just, about a mile away, less than a mile as the crow flies. And originally there was the Ebenezer Boys' School and the Ebenezer Girls' School. They were amalgamated sometime later into Ebenezer Primary School. And the children from Brereton went to school in Ebenezer, to one of those schools, girls or the boys as the case may be. And as I said, the educational system has served the members of the village well. There has been social mobility, and you could find people coming from this village who represent all of the major professions. Politicians even. We've had 2 ministers of government within quite recent times. Mr. Warwick Franklin is a Brereton boy. Mr. David three. Mr. David Estwick and his brother Tyrone Estwick, they're products of Brereton. We have produced a number of lawyers, a few doctors, teachers, and people representing all the various professions and the various trades. We've had a number of outstanding artisans as well. That Lane family, which I told you marks the western extremity, has been known for producing a few outstanding masons among them. And there's been a number of outstanding painters. The Ford family produced a few what we call foreman painters and carpenters, artisans of all sorts. And that's Britain for you in a nutshell. It's historical development and how the village has emerged, as it were, from a rural little agricultural settlement, 32.5 acres, to developing into one that has played its role in many ways and in the development of the country as a whole. And you see, the plantations are in such close walking distance, they more often than not worked at Carrington or Edgecombe or Bentley, as the case may be. They seldom moved out of that, from those three, those people who worked in the plantations, Bentley, Edgecombe, Carrington. Woodbourne was a kind of a sister plantation to Carrington. So you would get people between Woodbourne and Carrington. But they traveled by foot. And the area provided all the things that people needed for keeping stocks, livestock, and so on. There were sufficient areas of pasture land where you could go to cut grass for your sheep or your cow, as the case may be, or to pick vines for your rabbits. And that was how the village developed. Rural, all the elements and characteristics of a rural village, but as I said, the inhabitants of that generation, second generation Barbados as it were hell-bent on providing the means or taking advantage of the means available through education to further develop the third generation. And as I said, you could find among all the professions and the various vocations representation in this Burton village. You have, too, of interest, the social development of the village. Of course, before this modern generation, everybody was an aspiring West Indian cricketer. And everybody wanted to be a Everton Weekes or a Wes Hall or somebody of that generation. Those older would be able to speak to you of the Headleys and the Bradmans and so on. And the development of cricket in this village is of significance. Just beyond this mound here, where we look, when we look south, was a quarry, affectionately referred to by the villagers as the Marl Hole. And it was called the Marl Hole because there was the place where people went during the Christmas holiday, mainly to quarry marl. All the boys, girls, the older folk in the village went to the Marl Hole to dig marl, to spread around the yard, as it were, to give the appearance of snow in preparation for Christmas. Of course, if you could pick up a few boulders and smaller rocks and so on to put down to make pathways and so on. But that Marl Hole also had a large enough area for cricket to be played. And among all the stones and everything that's that knocked around in the area, the immediate area, there was sufficient room to put down 3 stumps and to play cricket, because the alternative would be playing in the road, in the tar road, as we called it in those days. And many great matches, many epic battles were fought in that Marl Hole. And in later years, as they began to push down the quarry, because Marl then became an important factor in the building development, as the Marl Hole became unavailable, we moved to an area just northeast of here, which I would like to direct you to at some point, where we developed an arena for cricket. And that was called the Gully. It was called the Gully because it is in a gully. And I tell you how that gully was developed. One summer vacation, a group of us, boys in a rural district, engaging in all the pleasures and mischief of country life. We were out with gutter perks, shooting at birds and so on. And along came this little Morris car, G182, being driven by the then manager at Edgecombe, Mr. Jeffrey Armstrong. And we started to run. And he called us back. And we went back like dutiful youngsters to hear what he had to say. He said, look, why are you all trying to shoot down the birds? What is wrong with letting them live it and fly around the place? Look, you see that place up there? Go up there and make a pitch and play a cricket. And every man, every bill, every cutlass, every hoe, anything that could chop and cut, we gathered up and went to that gully, as we called it. And by the end of the day, we had cut out a large enough place to put down a wicket. And over time, the area was developed further. We chopped down more and more trees and more brush and so on. And that gully, for a number of years, was the place where cricket was practiced in this village. And we turned out some better than average cricketers in this village from that gully. Of course, the competition was so fierce in those days that to say that somebody was a better than average cricketer does not tell the whole story, because there were so many better than average cricketers throughout the island. And some fierce battles were fought there. And growing up, you would hear of the battles fought there in that gully on a Sunday, especially top end versus bottom end. Top end was the eastern extremity of Britain versus the lower extremity. And we had a dividing line there that separated top from bottom. So the fellas say you came from top or you came from bottom. The defining line was the standpipe. Just up the road here, in the vicinity of where the Starblock plant, Starblock Concrete Works plant is, there was a standpipe there, and we chose that as the dividing line to separate top from bottom. So those fellas from top played against the fellas from bottom. And another very popular match fought out was Vauxhall versus Zephyr. Vauxhall represented the fellows who were supporters of the Vauxhall car. You would not imagine that. The fans of the Vauxhall car did themselves in a team, and the fans of the Zephyr car, you know what Zephyr car is? See what I mean? The fellas who supported the Zephyr car, they were on the other team. And that Vauxhall Zephyr match produced some fierce competition there in that gully. Now, Wayne Daniel, for example, who this pavilion is named after, was one of the younger boys who grew up in this village. And Wayne was the captain of the junior Zephyr team. He couldn't make the senior team, but he was always a big boy for his age. He was always much bigger than his contemporaries. And he was the captain of the Zephyr team, the junior Zephyr team. So much so, most of the boys in Burton were calling him by his nickname. You couldn't live in this village unless you had a nickname. And his nickname was Zephyr. And because he was the junior Zephyr captain. And that was the kind of fierce competition that was generated from playing in that gully.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gollop. The discussion continues next week at the same time. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been My Community Britain. Take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. Goodbye.